11 recessions since 1950. That's one every 6.8 years. On average, every single one followed the same basic sequence. Rates rise, spending slows, jobs disappear. Yet most people think recessions happen because of dramatic, unpredictable events. Bank collapses, market panics, black swan moments. The data tells a different story. 8 of those 11 recessions started with no dramatic trigger at all. Just a quiet, mechanical sequence. Playing out the same way, in the same order, over and over again. The average expansion lasts about 5 years. The average contraction, 11 months. 68% of the entire economy depends on one force, consumer spending. When that force shifts, everything else follows. The pattern repeats until it doesn't. And understanding the stages, all 5 of them, changes how the entire cycle makes sense. That's what most people miss about the business cycle. It's not random, it's not driven by headlines. It's a 5-stage mechanism, and each stage triggers the next. Miss one and the whole thing looks chaotic. See all 5, and the logic is obvious. Stay for the full sequence, and the signal that's caught every turn. The business cycle, the natural rhythm of expansion and contraction in the economy, runs on a loop. Growth, peak, slowdown, contraction, recovery. Sounds simple. But the mechanism behind each transition is where the real understanding lives. Think of it like seasons. Spring doesn't cause summer, but the conditions of spring make summer inevitable. Same with the business cycle. Each phase creates the conditions for the next one. That's not a theory. That's what the data shows across 75 years of economic history. Stage 1 is expansion. The economy grows, businesses hire, wages rise, consumer confidence climbs, credit flows easily. This is the phase everyone loves, and the phase that plants the seeds of its own end. Watch what happens during a typical expansion. Businesses don't just grow, they stretch. They take on debt to expand. They hire ahead of demand. They build inventory based on optimism, not orders. Household debt rises. Between 1992 and 2007, the longest expansion on record at that point, total household debt in the United States more than tripled. That means every expansion carries a hidden cost. Growth feels good. But each year of growth adds leverage to the system, like running with a heavier pack each mile. Eventually the weight matters more than the speed. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is where the temperature changes. Stage 2 is the peak. Growth doesn't crash. It stalls. GDP growth slows from 3 or 4% down toward 1 or 2. Hiring doesn't stop. It decelerates. Orders slow. Inventories pile up. The economy looks fine on the surface, but underneath the engine is losing power. The data shows something striking. In 8 of 11 post-war recessions, GDP was still positive in the quarter right before contraction started. Unemployment was low, markets were stable, everything looked fine. Translation: the peak is invisible while you're standing on it. That's what separates the business cycle from a simple chart. The peak isn't a dramatic event. It's a subtle shift that only shows up in leading indicators, signals that move before the economy turns. Things like new building permits, manufacturing orders, the yield curve, the relationship between short and long-term interest rates. So here's a question. GDP is growing. Unemployment is below 4%. The stock market just hit an all-time high. Healthy economy? Or 12 months from recession? Based on what the data shows, those 3 numbers can't tell you. They're all lagging indicators, signals that confirm what already happened. All 3 looked exactly like that before 8 of 11 recessions. The leading indicators told the real story, but most people weren't watching them. Now stage 3. The slowdown. This is where the mechanism gets interesting. The Federal Reserve, the central bank that controls the overnight lending rate, typically raises rates during expansions to prevent overheating. The average tightening cycle lasts about 2 years. But the effect of those rate hikes doesn't show up for 12 to 18 months. That lag is where most misunderstanding lives. Think of it like turning down a thermostat. The setting changes immediately. The room temperature takes an hour to follow. The Fed changes the rate, and the economy takes over a year to feel it. By the time the slowdown becomes visible, The rate hikes that caused it happened over a year ago. 83% of Fed tightening cycles since 1950 have ended with a recession. Not all of them, but 5 out of 6. That's a mechanical relationship, not a coincidence. The slowdown hits consumer spending first, and because consumer spending makes up 68% of GDP, everything downstream follows. A factory in Ohio cuts overtime hours. Workers spend less at the local diner. The diner owner delays buying a new delivery truck. The dealership lays off a salesperson. One decision in one factory. And 4 households feel the impact within 90 days. Multiply that by thousands of factories across the country, and the feedback loop becomes the economy's dominant force. That's stage 3. The dominoes start falling. Each one small. The chain is what matters. Stage 4 is contraction. Like the official recession, 2 or more consecutive quarters of shrinking economic output. This is what makes headlines. Job losses accelerate. Businesses cut costs. Credit tightens. The cycle feeds on itself. But the pattern isn't perfect. 2 of those 11 recessions broke the standard sequence. 1973 and 2020 didn't follow the typical slow build. External shocks, an oil embargo and a pandemic, skipped the middle stages entirely. They jumped from expansion straight to contraction, bypassing the gradual peak and slowdown. That exception actually confirms the mechanism. The 5-stage sequence describes how the economy's internal dynamics produce recessions. External shocks are a different animal. Knowing which type of downturn is unfolding changes everything about what signals matter. The pattern repeats until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, the reason is almost always external, not internal. The average recession lasts 11 months. The shortest post-war contraction was 6 months. The longest, the 2008 financial crisis, lasted 18. In practice, that means most recessions are over before the average person even agrees one has started. The NBER, the official body that dates business cycles, typically announces a recession 6 to 12 months after it's already begun. That's when stage 5 arrives. Recovery. The economy bottoms out and starts climbing again. Rates drop, spending stabilizes, hiring resumes. The cycle resets. But recovery doesn't happen evenly. The fastest recoveries, like after the 1990 recession, took just 3 quarters to regain lost output. The slowest, after 2008, took over 3 years. The depth of the contraction and the amount of leverage in the system determine recovery speed. Shallow recessions with low debt bounce back fast. Deep recessions with heavy debt limp back slowly. You'd think of it like recovering from the flu versus recovering from surgery. The symptoms look similar. The timelines don't. Now zoom out. 11 recessions in 75 years. Expansions that average 5 years. Contractions that average 11 months. The economy spends roughly 85% of its time growing and 15% contracting. Recessions aren't anomalies. They're a feature of the system. The economy doesn't grow in straight lines, it pulses. And understanding that rhythm changes how every economic headline lands. Growth isn't permanent. Neither is contraction. The cycle is the constant. The pattern repeats until it doesn't. And it's been repeating for 75 years. Now. If the business cycle is this mechanical, how do you know which stage is playing out? The signals fire in sequence, and each one has a track record. Watch the yield curve. When short-term rates rise above long-term rates, an inversion, it's preceded every recession since 1955. The average lead time? 14 months. 0 false negatives. 2 arguable false positives. That's a better track record than almost any other economic indicator. Watch initial jobless claims. When they rise 15% or more from their cycle low, a recession has followed within 6 to 10 months. The data shows this signal firing before every recession since 1967. Watch the ISM Manufacturing Index, a monthly survey of factory activity. When it drops below 50, the line between expansion and contraction, and stays there for 3 or more months, the economy is almost always in stage 3 or 4 already. They fire in sequence. The yield curve moves first. Jobless claims confirm. Manufacturing shows the damage. By the time all 3 have fired, the cycle has already turned. 5 stages. Expansion, peak, slowdown, contraction, recovery. Each one creates the conditions for the next. The mechanism is simple. The timing isn't. But the pattern, over 75 years of data, is remarkably consistent. The economy doesn't crash randomly every 7 years. It cycles mechanically through the same sequence, driven by credit, spending, and the lag between policy and impact. The signals are there if you know where to look. If you know,